So welcome to all of you here and online to the Inheritance Tour. And I'm really excited to be with you to guide you through the exhibit in my own way. I just wanted to mention that this exhibit can be quite triggering. When I first came to the show, just after it opened, I wept. Like that was the word I had for it. I didn't cry, I wept. And I needed Kleenex so badly. So a whole bunch of feelings just rose to the surface because a lot of what I had seen resonated with my own experience. So I encourage you to have your tissues and hankies or whatever ready in case something emotionally, touches you. So please save your questions to the end of the Q&A. It just makes it easier for people online if everybody asks their questions at the same time. Before we get started with the actual tour, I wanted to read a piece by Chief Dan George. I can see a lot of you here will probably recognize Chief Dan George from TV, famous actor. He was also a poet as well. His given name at birth, Teshuano, translates as thunder coming up over the land from the water. So Dan George is also known as Gespanuth Slahut. So this is his lament for Confederation, which he leave in 1967. How long have I known you, O Canada? 100 years? Yes, and many, many Selenum more. And today when you celebrate your 100 years, O Canada, I am sad for all the Indian people throughout the land. For I've known you when your forests were mine, when they gave me my meat and my clothing. I've known you in your streams and rivers where your fish flashed and danced in the sun, where the water said, come, come and eat of my abundance. I've known you in the freedom of your winds, and my spirit, like the winds, once roamed your good lands. But in the long 100 years since the white man came, I have seen my freedom disappear like the salmon going mysteriously out to sea. The white man's strange customs, which I could not understand, pressed down upon me until I could no longer breathe. When I fought to protect my land and my home, I was called a savage. When I neither understood nor welcomed this way of life, I was called lazy. When I tried to rule my people, I was stripped of my authority. My nation was ignored in your history books. They were little more in of Canada than the buffalo that ranged the plains. I was ridiculed in your plays and motion pictures. And when I drank your firewater, I got drunk, very, very drunk, and I forgot. Oh, Canada, how can I celebrate you with this cemetery, this 100 years? Shall I thank you for the reserves that are left me of my beautiful forests, for the canned fish of my rivers, for the loss of my pride and authority, even among my own people, for the lack of my will to fight back? No, no, I must forget what's past and gone. Oh God in heaven, give me back the courage of the olden chiefs. Let me wrestle with my surroundings. Let me again, as in the days of my environment, let me humbly accept this new culture and through it rise up and go on. Oh God, like the thunderbird of old, I shall rise again out of the sea. I shall grab the instruments of the white man's success, his skills, and with these new tools, I shall build my race into the proudest segment of your society. Before I follow the great chiefs who have gone before us, O Canada, I shall see these things come to pass. I shall see our young braves and our chiefs sitting in the houses of law and government, ruling and be ruled by the knowledge and freedoms of our great land. So shall we shatter the barriers of our isolation. So shall the next 100 years be the greatest in the proud history of our tribes and nations. Thank you. So I wanted to read that as I guess, a preamble and a setup, because when I think of inheritance, I think of what has been, okay, these free apps are ridiculous. Okay, so when I think of inheritance, I think of it in different ways. What's given, what could be given to me, what we give to others, what we receive from others, and what kind of inheritance is this? An inheritance of racial discrimination, and how do we move forward through this? So just kind of plant that little seed as we go in. One thing I wanted to point out, there's a little sign here that mentions this. So it says throughout 2021 and 2022, the Art Gallery of Alberta is using typefaces designed or developed by women and members of the BIPOC community exclusively, which I think is a really major thing. So typography basically is the type itself. And there's actually histories behind typography if you look into it. And one thing that I did find out was, and I found this in on a website, every font has a story. Every typeface carries the culture marks of their makers, along with the stories of the political and cultural moment in which they were designed. But to date, those histories have been largely devoid of experiences from Black, Indigenous, and people of color designers. So there was a survey done in the States, and they found that out of all the graphic designers, so there's about 9,500 respondents, only 3% of those graphic designers identified as Black. Now, I would say even maybe 0.5% are typeface designers. So how can you support these people? Use their fonts. And the fonts that are being used are by, there's Montserrat. How many of you have heard of Montserrat? Okay. So Montserrat was designed by a woman who lives in Buenos Aires. She is not Black, but she's designed by a woman, which I think is, she is a woman. And what she said about the font is that it was based around her neighborhood, Montserrat. So again, there's histories behind fonts. So think of that when you're looking for fonts and stuff. So she was originally going to name her font Progress, but that name was taken. So she went to Montserrat. So let's go on in, come on. Okay, so we're going to start with Stephen Nenota's exhibit. Stephen Nenota is Japanese Canadian. And you'll see this card here. There are actually 3 types of identity cards that were issued to Japanese Canadians based on their generation. So first generation Japanese would be Japanese born. They're called Issei. So if you know the Japanese numbering system, at least 1, 2, 3, each Nissan. Issei is the first Japanese born. Nisei is the firstborn Japanese Canadians. And then San would be the following generation after that. So this is it's a very interesting exhibit. So yeah, what happened was people, after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the United States ramped things up when it came to detaining Japanese people, and Canada followed the United States. So we're gonna go in here and just see Stephen Nenota's exhibit, and I'll talk a bit about what it looks like. So come on in. Okay, so this is Stephen Nenota's exhibit. And what's interesting about it is if you take a closer look, you'll see that there are two sizes of houses all throughout. And there's a ladder, and the ladder was inspired by Stephen's great-grandfather, who was imprisoned in a camp in the Rocky Mountains, but he also picked fruit in the Okanagan, and he needed a ladder to pick the fruit. And Stephen's daughter had asked Stephen, or she had a dream actually about a ladder to the moon. And so Stephen incorporated those two ideas into the ladder. And the moon, you'll see that it actually changes. So you'll actually see the phases of the moon. These houses here are very symbolic in the material that they're made out of as well. So the internment camps, there are about 21,000 people evacuated within a 100-mile distance of the West Coast. So no Japanese people at all. Everybody was cleared out. And so some people were given the option to be deported back to Japan. About 12,000 of those people ended up being in camps in the Rocky Mountains, and some over to Ontario as well. So these houses are made out of tar paper, and tar paper was used to build homes, to seal homes. Some even say homes, they were shacks, really. So shacks put together and barracks made out of wet wood or just tar paper, or having the tar paper over top of the wood to seal it, because once wood dries, it's not going to be joined together, you're going to get cracks. So I like to think of what would that sound like, in the middle of the night. It's cold outside, the wind is coming through, you're trying to keep your family safe, and you're trying to survive under very unstable conditions because you don't know what's going to be next for you. And according to the Canadian Encyclopedia, and this is a very harsh thing to know, but there was an economic reason behind the detainment. A General Morris Pope was disgusted when a BC politician saw war with Japan as a heaven-sent excuse to eliminate Japanese-Canadian economic competition. So, because at the time, the Japanese would have had nice homes, nice equipment, fishing boats, all of these things. Well, it was an excuse to just scoop all of that. So the Japanese were evacuating aliens, and under international law, the internment, and I find internment just not the best word to call this, it was imprisonment, refers to the detention of enemy aliens, people from other countries that were at war with Canada. So in World War I, it was Germans, people from like Austria, Hungary, people from the Ottoman Empire. And in World War II, it turned out to be Japanese people, Germans, and Italians. So why did these people escape? That was one thing that came to my mind, because there were no prison walls. But I found that no prison walls were needed to keep people inside the camp, since the isolated location, rugged landscape, and the hostile social climate of the province were considered enough of a deterrent to just eliminate any thoughts of escape. So imagine what it would be like to all of a sudden see no Japanese faces on the street. They're not around the homes that they've built. It's just a very shocking situation. And I also found that the internment between Japanese Canadians and Japanese Americans was very different. So Japanese Canadians were not allowed to fight in World War II for Canada because that would lead to them asking for voting rights. And no one wanted Japanese people to vote. Whereas in the States, Japanese Americans were drafted, but then a lot of Japanese Americans were thinking, well, why should I fight if you're putting me and my family in camps? So I had a couple of things that I wanted to read off. I thought they were very touching. One, to just talk about the experience of being, what would be a draft dodger, essentially, and then what it would be like having to defend yourself. But before I get to that, I'm just going to read you some haiku, because what's interesting about the internment camps was that there are very little literary records. Very little has been written or saved. There are 2 volumes of haiku poetry, and it was one person who, his name was Sakeo Samishima. He spent his final years in Coaldale, and he was part of a haiku club in the Tashmi camp that he stayed at. So at Tashmi, they had this haiku club. They put together these collections of haiku, and they're some of the only remaining documentation from the camps. And they give you an insight into what life would have been during those times. A couple of them, so you get an idea. I don't know who wrote these haikus specifically. They're just all part of the collection. Feeling sleepy, our eyes on the stove as we huddle around it. Regretting the year's end, I sit at home, still unemployed. Bedridden mother, I hold her up to see the snowy town. Cover of mist rising off the winter river. Let's keep going. So I really like this exhibit here because it's so queer. Okay, 20 minutes have passed. Okay, so take a look around. You are encouraged to take prints of each. It looks like just the ones in the middle are here. So Adrian Stimpson is the Two-Spirit artist, which I didn't know until I started doing some research on him. And so Adrian Stimpson collaborated with A.A. Bronson, who is also a queer artist, and their histories are very much in line. It's very strange to see something like this because it actually reflects on a situation that I recently had, and now I kind of have to go and unpack it. So Adrian Stimpson, he is a residential school survivor, and A.A. Bronson, who has a stack of books right there, that is his contribution. Adrian Stimpson's great-great-grandfather, his name was Old Sun, and he signed Treaty 7. A.A. Bronson's great-great-grandfather, the Reverend Timms, ran the Old Sun Residential School. And now, after how many years, these 2 descendants have come together. which is really mind-boggling to me. And I actually think, and this is just a theory, but I don't think that this type of reconciliation can happen with straight people. I'm sorry. And the reason I say that is because for Adrian, I would think that being two-spirit would be a struggle. And not only would he be Indigenous and marginalized that way, but also be marginalized due to being two-spirit. For A.A. Bronson, he is a gay man and has, a very interesting background and has experimented in different things. So Bronson would probably be about 75, 76. He would have been an activist during the AIDS era. So again, marginalization fronts. So that's how I could see the two coming together from very extreme types of marginalization. When Bronson approached Adrian to do an apology, Adrian took it to his people and basically said, well, as long as he walks the walk, he's fine. And the apology was. So what I encourage you to do is just take a quick look around because all of these are Adrian's paintings. There are these all monuments, and I would encourage you, because they're around the room, maybe they're sentries, maybe they're protectors, and look at the symbols within them, because you'll see Indigenous symbols along with symbols of the so-called New World, right? But then you see symbolism of the New World that's also been incorporated into Indigenous culture. So for example, you'll see the hat. There's a hat, a cross, and a pipe right here. So depending on where you're culturally situated, you're gonna see different things. So some people just might see hat, cross, pipe. That's it, I'm good. But I know for me, when I first saw this, I saw like a medicine man, medicine woman, with the pipe filled with medicine. So as you take a look around, you'll see these different things. Adrian also used a lot of buffalo imagery. He initially started to romanticize the buffalo, but actually started using it as a symbol of strength. This table setting is really interesting. I found out that the table and the benches were made by a survivor of Old Sun. Adrian commissioned the table and the benches from him. This is to replicate the seating at Old Sun. This is how the staff would have eaten, which is very far removed from what the children would have eaten at that time. Also at Old Sun, there was an uprising because of a wave of tuberculosis. Many children died. The Reverend Tims would not send them home to their families. And this is how this whole apology came out, was for the atrocity that happened at Old Sun. And if you notice the buffalo, the bison, you see it everywhere and it's on the tables. The bison are facing you as to interrogate you. So why are you sitting there, right? And there is one red rose to symbolize assimilation. So bouquet of white roses with one red one. Let's see. We'll go and see Deanna Bowen next. I just had one more note about, the collaboration between between Adrian Stimpson and A.A. Bronson. So Stimpson was asked to prepare a statement about the abuse that in residential schools. He had gone to 3 of them in his life, and he realized that working with Bronson through this apology actually helped him heal from the trauma that he was suffering from his own residential school experience. Deanna Bowen is another queer artist, which wouldn't know just from walking in here. So I'm very excited about that as well. And so I love what Deanna does because she works with archival material. And I think, you know, as we're looking at, I hate these words, diversity, equity, and inclusion, that we have to look at diversifying our archives. And like, because who runs the archives determines what's important and what's not. One thing that I heard actually was that, I have not found any way of corroborating it, was that archival material about Black communities was actually destroyed within the province of Alberta. And that could also relate to other folks as well. I haven't found any evidence to that, but that's what I was told. So I'm just gonna take that for what it is. So this speaks to me a lot because there's a whole lot of things going on here. So this is a 1911 petition against Black immigration to Alberta. So this is archival material. I was with, there's another curatorial assistant here, and he actually knows Stephen Nenota for one, because we had this long conversation like, oh my God, what? And then he was saying that he's been in this room so long that he's looked at all of these to look for names. So think about it. I mean, it's gonna take a long time. There's about 15 to 18 names per page. And I noticed on one of them, and it's on several of them actually, that the writing is the same for different names. So it's like, oh, I think, you know, I'm gonna put down my friend too. Which I thought was really weird. And just some of the names that you see, maybe some influential names that you might see around the city. Just saying, I'm not gonna say any names and get into any sort of lawsuit or anything, but yeah, just wanted to bring that to your attention. Also another thing with, because this is not the only petition, there are petitions from all over Canada. And even the famous 5 got all caught up in there too, which is really, I'm a very strong feminist. I always have, I think I was born a feminist when I popped out. And my family, you know, moved here, and I really wanted to get to know, like, you know, who were the Black people who came before me. And, you know, doing this research, and, you know, doing this research way back when, and then I'm like, oh my God, Nellie McClung and Emily Murphy and all those folks signed a petition, not even wanting us here, but they're fighting for suffrage. I don't get it. And also, she was a fan of eugenics, which is pretty scary. Anyway, but this brings the sense of exclusion for me, for sure. I mean, when my family, my parents moved to England, they had me and another sibling, but before they had me, the only house that my parents could find was one that was haunted for many years, and no one lived in it, but that was the only place that we could live. My mom was pregnant at the time, and they were able to find council housing and move, but if she wasn't pregnant, they would be in a really rundown house with an outhouse in the back. Like, it's terrible, terrible. And we were up in the north, like Yorkshire. I mean, sorry. Hi, Yorkshire. Okay, so, so feel free to take a look at the names. See if there's any names that you recognize. And then I'll meet you around the corner. I just wanted to just read a quick quote from Deanna. Every community, like every family, needs an archivist. Oh no, this is a quote about Deanna. Every community, like every family, needs an archivist. To know Deanna, to be able to work, to think, to laugh, to drink, to gossip with her, is to be reminded that the everyday acts of quiet resistance, queer kinship, and Black joy that makes up a collective life will be the meaning to those who come after us, even if they are only belatedly by the careful listeners among us. And rather than tell her audience what to see, Bowen asks us to look, to truly look at the ways images have real, tangible, and sometimes violent effects on their subjects. So her work helps us to see how art might matter in a civic sense. So we've come from the petition to public safety, right? And just being able to just live freely. So quickly going back to the petition, I had one more question about that. Or two questions. So yeah, do you see a name you recognize? And it's funny, I did find a George Bush who lived at 1019 Jasper Avenue. But what if one of your ancestors signed that? Maybe they did. What would that mean? The Klan comes to town. That's what this exhibit is. The Klan comes to town. And this is a recreation of a CBC show from, I believe, I'm not going to say the year. I believe it's in the 1960s. So these are actors recreating the conversation. And this is the actual set that they sat on, which is pretty interesting. So when I first came in, I thought, why are these, what, do I go up there? There's no rope. But yeah, this, and like with an ashtray too, it's recreating that whole set and that conversation. So you could sit and listen and almost feel like these people are sitting right beside you. Very interesting. For the Klan outfits, the first outfits of the KKK, so there's actually 2 editions of the KKK. I didn't know this. But the first outfits of the KKK came out in the 1860s, 1870s, and they wore white, just like the white hood, the white robes. These are outfits from the second KKK, which started in 1915. And yeah, I found information that says that the second KKK was heavily influenced by fraternal societies of the early 20th century. So that inspired like their codes and rituals and all of that stuff. They just wanted to be Phi Kappa Phi, but triple K instead. And there are independent clan groups as well that may have their own colors and symbols, but generally speaking, white robes were pretty much a rank and file member. You're a gen pop. And so there's not a lot of decoration on the material. It's very plain. But as you can see, it's like, you could come around the corner and think, are you wearing a ribbon skirt? Because, you know, it looks very similar to the stylings of a ribbon skirt that an Indigenous woman would wear. So I don't get that. Anyway, so white robes, rank and file, and green robes were in many clan groups. The green robes were for grand dragons. So this is a grand dragon. There are black robes as well. Black robes are for nighthawks, clan security guards. Yeah, you see anybody walking around, black hood, nighthawk with a K. Let's see. And then leaders or imperial wizards, they can choose a variety of colors. But yeah, they can wear like a variety of stripes, sashes, emblems. I would think, and this is just a guess, that some of the symbols might be related to individual clan groups, kind of like football teams. Yeah. So very unusual exhibit. These are replicas. They are not the original clan outfits, but I don't know, just imagine what it would be. I don't know, just sit down like at your sewing machine and like sewing an outfit for yourself. This is really strange. So I do want to close this off and then take any questions.
It was a real pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thank you.